You owe me this, Dad. You've always had more than you needed. It's time you did something real for this family." That was my son, 36 years old, standing in my kitchen in my house 3 days after I found out. Not from him, not from my daughter-in-law, but from a mutual friend at church. That he'd had a wedding, a full ceremony, flowers, a reception home, a band, the whole thing. And I wasn't there. I wasn't invited. I didn't even know it was happening until the photo showed up on Facebook. Let me back up. My name is Frank. No, I'm getting ahead of myself. Names don't matter as much as what happened. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I worked 31 years as a structural engineer. I raised my son alone after his mother left when he was 9. I packed his lunches, drove him to baseball practice, helped him through college, co-signed his first apartment lease. I did all of it. Not perfectly. I know that. But I showed up every single day. I'm going to call my son Jonah, because that's not his name and I'd rather not put his real one in this. His wife. I'll call her Renata. Her family had money. Old money. The kind that comes with opinions about other people. I first met Renata at Thanksgiving. 2 years before the wedding, I didn't attend. She was polite to me the way people are polite to someone they've already made a decision about. She looked at my hands. I still have the calluses from years on job sites before I moved into the office, and I saw something flicker across her face. Not disgust exactly, more like mild disappointment. After dinner, I overheard her tell Jonah in the hallway that she thought I was sweet. The way she said it, sweet meant harmless. Sweet meant small. Jonah didn't correct her. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People take time to warm up. Her family was different from ours, that was all. I'd come from nothing. Literally nothing. A 2-bedroom house in rural Ohio with 4 brothers and a father who worked the night shift at a paper mill. I'd built what I had 1 decade at a time. That's not a story Renata's family knew how to read. But Jonah knew that story. He'd lived it with me. About 8 months before the wedding, Jonah called me on a Sunday night. He seemed uncomfortable from the first word. There was a long pause before he said what he actually called to say. He told me that Renata's family was very important to her, that her parents had certain expectations for the wedding, that it was going to be a formal affair with a specific guest list. He used the phrase, curated experience, and I had to press my back teeth together. Then he said it. He said he thought it would be better if I wasn't there, that my presence might make things complicated, that Renata's father, a man I'd met exactly twice, had concerns. About what, Jonah wouldn't say directly. About my background, he finally admitted. About how I might come across. I asked him what that meant. He said, "Dad, you know how you are." I did not know how I was. I asked him to explain. He said I was loud sometimes, but I told long stories, that I didn't always read the room. I sat with that for a moment. I thought about every room I had ever sat in for that boy. Every school play, every awards night, every emergency room visit when he broke his collarbone at 14, every move to a new apartment. I thought about the room I was sitting in right now, in the house I'd owned for 22 years. Alone on a Sunday night, because my son was marrying someone whose family thought I didn't read rooms correctly. I told him I understood. He said thank you, like I'd done him a favor. I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. I didn't call him back that night. I didn't call him the next week. I sent him a card when I eventually figured out the wedding had happened. A simple card, nothing dramatic. And I wrote that I wished him happiness, and I meant it. Whatever was broken between us, I didn't want his marriage to fail because of it. But I didn't hear from him. Not for 4 months. When he called again, I almost didn't recognize the energy in his voice. The easy confidence was gone. He was talking faster than usual. He asked how I was, which he hadn't done in a long time. and I knew before he got to the point that this wasn't a social call. His father-in-law's business had collapsed. I'll leave out the specifics, but it involved a commercial real estate partnership that went badly, and a loan that had been personally guaranteed. The family had lost a significant amount. Renata's parents were having to sell their house. There was debt, there was panic. And then Jonah asked about mine. I own a lake house in northern Michigan. I bought it 15 years ago for about $380,000. It has 3 bedrooms, a dock, 2 acres of woods. It appraised recently at just over $1.1 million. I'd planned to retire there. That was the plan I'd been working toward for the last decade. Leave the city, live quietly, fish in the mornings, read in the afternoons. Simple. Jonah said they needed liquidity. He said Renata was devastated by what her parents were going through. He said if I sold the lake house and gave them the proceeds, it would change everything for the family. Help them get back on their feet. He used the word invest, like I'd be investing in the family. He said, "You have more than you need, Dad. You always have." There it was. I asked him one question. I said, "Were you going to tell me you got married, or was I just going to find out eventually?" Silence. I said, "I found out from Carol Pittman at First Methodist. She saw the photos online." More silence. He said, "I knew you'd make it into a thing." I said I wasn't making it into anything. I said I was asking a question. And then I told him I needed some time to think about his request, and that I would get back to him. He seemed surprised by that. I think he expected either a fight or a yes. I gave him neither. I spent the next 2 weeks thinking more carefully than I have about anything in a long time. I talked to my accountant. I talked to a man named Eddie Bursell. Eddie was the foreman on the first major project I ever managed, back in 1991. He was 53 then, and I was 28, and I knew absolutely nothing. And Eddie knew that, and instead of humiliating me the way he could have, he just quietly taught me. He showed me how to read a site, how to talk to crews, how to handle inspectors. He never made me feel small for not knowing. He just filled in what was missing. I hadn't spoken to Eddie in a few years, but I still had his number. He lives in a small town in West Virginia now. Retired. His wife passed 2 years ago, and he lives alone in the house they built together. I called him on a Tuesday evening. We talked for 2 hours. At the end of the call, almost as an aside, he mentioned that his roof had started to fail, that he'd gotten estimates, that it was going to cost around $14,000 he didn't have, and that he was looking at taking out a loan against the house at his age. He laughed about it the way people laugh about things that aren't actually funny. I told him I'd call him back. That conversation changed something in me. Here's what I decided. I was not going to give Jonah the lake house. I was not going to give him the proceeds from the lake house. I was not going to give him money I had spent 30 years earning because he needed to bail out a family that hadn't thought I was good enough to watch their daughter get married. But I also wasn't going to do nothing with what I had. I called my attorney and we spent a week working through the paperwork. I'd already been thinking, before all of this started, about what to do with the lake house eventually. I don't have other children. My brothers are okay, all of them doing fine. I had started thinking about legacy in the abstract. Jonah's call made the abstract concrete. I transferred the lake house into a small charitable trust. The trust is set up to maintain the property for 10 years, and then, at my direction or upon certain conditions, distribute the proceeds to 2 organizations, a workforce training program in rural Ohio similar to the one that helped me get my engineering certification when I was 22 and couldn't afford the coursework, and a local affiliate of Habitat for Humanity in the county where Eddie Bursell lives, specifically earmarked for roof and structural repairs for elderly homeowners. Then I called Eddie back and told him to expect a check for the roof. Not from me personally, I said. From a fund I was setting up. He was quiet for a while, and then he said, "You were always a good kid, Frank." He still calls me Frank, even though that's not my name. He's called me that since 1991, and I've never corrected him. That made me laugh for the first time in about 3 weeks. Then I called Jonah. I told him about the trust. I explained what it meant. I was calm. I wasn't cruel. I told him the lake house was no longer mine to give, and that it hadn't been for about 10 days. He didn't take it well. He said I was punishing him. I told him I wasn't. He said I was being vindictive. I told him I was doing what I should have been thinking about doing for years, making sure what I'd built went somewhere it would mean something. He said this was about the wedding, and I told him honestly that the wedding was part of it, yes, but that it had clarified something I should have clarified a long time ago. He said, "So you're just writing me off?" I said, "Jonah, I'm not writing you off. I love you. I will always love you. But I'm not your retirement plan. And I'm not Renata's family's emergency fund, and I'm not a problem to be managed and brought out when it's convenient." He hung up. Renata called me 2 days later. I'll give her this. She was more composed than Jonah was. She asked if there was any flexibility in the trust arrangement. I told her there wasn't. She said she hoped I understood what this meant for them. I told her I did and that I was sorry they were going through a hard time. I meant that sincerely. She said, "You know, I never thought you were." And then she stopped. She didn't finish the sentence. I told her whatever she was going to say, she could say it. She said, "I didn't think you were the kind of person who would do something like this." I asked her what kind of person she thought I was. She didn't have an answer for that. We ended the call politely, and I haven't spoken to her since. Jonah and I have exchanged a few texts. Stiff, short, careful. I don't know what we are to each other right now. I don't know if that repairs itself. I hope it does. I genuinely hope that somewhere down the road, when the shock of it fades, he can look at what happened and understand that I wasn't trying to destroy him. I was trying, maybe too late, maybe badly, to stop being invisible to my own child. Because that's what it came down to. Not the money. Not the house, not even the wedding, really. I had made myself invisible for years. I swallowed things I should have said. I accepted terms I never agreed to. I showed up in every way I knew how and told myself that was enough, that eventually it would register, that he would see it. He didn't, or he did and thought he could keep cashing that check indefinitely. Either way, the account is different now. I drove up to the lake house one weekend in October, about 6 weeks after all of this happened. I sat on the dock in the morning with a cup of coffee, and I watched the light come up over the water. The trees were full color. Orange, red, that specific yellow that only lasts about 4 days before it's gone. A loon was out near the middle of the lake, doing what loons do, completely indifferent to everything. I thought about my father at the paper mill. I thought about Eddie Bursell teaching me to read a sight. I thought about Jonah at 9 years old, the night his mother left, falling asleep on the couch with his head in my lap while I watched the news with the sound turned low so I wouldn't wake him. I thought I did not build this life so that it could be handed over to people who were embarrassed by where it came from. I thought the people who actually saw me, Eddie, a few good friends, the guys I came up with, they don't need me to prove anything. And the people who needed me to be less than I was in order to make them comfortable were never going to be satisfied no matter what I gave them. That's not a lesson you can teach someone. They have to arrive at it themselves, or they don't. I finished my coffee. The loon dove and disappeared. The light kept moving across the water. I don't regret it. Not the trust, not the call to Jonah, not a word of what I said to Renata. I regret that it took this long to get here. I regret the years I spent making myself smaller than I was to fit into spaces that were never going to feel like home anyway. But I don't regret the house. It's going somewhere. It will matter. That's more than I can say for a lot of things I've given away in my life. I keep coming back to that Sunday night phone call. The one where Jonah told me not to come. Not the one where he asked for the house. The earlier one. Because that's where the real story lives. I said, I understand, and I hung up, and I sat in the dark. And the honest truth is, part of me understood, not the decision, but the dynamic that created it. I had spent years making myself easy to dismiss. I accepted things quietly. I didn't push back when I should have. I told myself that love meant absorbing whatever came at you without flinching. I thought that was strength. I was wrong about that. What I was doing wasn't strength. It was avoidance dressed up as patience. There's a version of cause and effect that people don't talk about much because it's uncomfortable. When you consistently accept being treated as less than you are, you teach people that's the correct price. Not because they're necessarily bad people, but because no one corrects them. The bill comes due eventually. It always does. In my case, the bill arrived in the form of a phone call asking for a $1.1 million property from a son who hadn't bothered to invite me to his wedding. What I learned, slowly and not without some pain, is that genuine integrity isn't just about being honest with other people. It's about being honest with yourself first. About what you're worth. About what you'll accept. About when shoreless stops being gracious and starts being complicit. I had let things slide for so long that I'd lost the thread of my own boundaries. Eddie Bursell never lost that thread. He knew exactly who he was. A man who worked hard, treated people right, and didn't apologize for either. That's why, when it came time to make a decision about the lake house, his name was the one that came to mind. The clear-headed part of this, the part that took real thinking, not just emotion, was understanding that walking away from Jonah's demand wasn't punishment, it was correction. There's a difference. Punishment is about making someone hurt. Correction is about restoring an honest accounting of things. I didn't want my son to suffer. I wanted him to understand, maybe for the first time, that the world doesn't automatically owe you what your parents built. And the hardest kind of clarity to come by is the kind that costs you something. It would have been easier to write the check, or to fight, to scream, to make it ugly. Both of those options would have let me off the hook emotionally. Instead, I had to sit with it, think it through, and make a decision I could stand behind 10 years from now. That kind of steadiness, building it, maintaining it when everything is pulling the other direction, that's what I should have been modeling for him all along. I just got to it late. I don't know what Jonah will make of all this eventually. I hope he gets there. I hope someday he calls Eddie and introduces himself and finds out who his father was before he was just Dad. I think that conversation would do him good. But whether he does or doesn't, I know what I did with what I had. I know where it went and why. And when I sat on that dock in October and watched the loon dive under the water, I felt, for the first time in a long time, like the person I actually set out to be. That's not nothing. At 63, that's just about everything.